Hello, I'm Hugo Eccles from Untitled Motorcycles, and I'm here at the bike shed with our Zero XP electric motorcycle build. So this is the Zero XP, an electric motorcycle commissioned by Zero Motorcycles, who are based in Northern California and built in our workshop in San Francisco. Zero approached me to come and have a look at their yet unreleased SRF, which is the new model they've just released, which this is based on. They were really generous. We got unprecedented kind of access to pre-production CAD. So there was an initial design process, sketching, rough models, and then went into 3D CAD, specifically SolidWorks. And so most of the motorcycle is in fact assembled from CNC machined, 3D machined, or 5-axis machined panels. Some of them are metal, like the seat and the nose and the belly pan. Many of the other panels are CNC'd ABS. So let me take you around the motorcycle in more detail. The first thing you probably notice is it doesn't have a traditional petrol tank. When I was designing the motorcycle, there are only a few details that you need to support the rider. There's a seat, handlebars, foot pegs, and then the one other thing you really need are two panels to grip with your knees, because that really helps control the motorcycle. So apart from these two panels, there's also a top part which holds the control screen from the original motorcycle. This little indent here is for an RFID keyless key, which starts the bike. On the custom top tree is there's a Motor Gadget digital speedo, and then behind here there's a little dot matrix display that either shows N for neutral, green N for neutral, or a red D for drive, and that you put the bike into, you either activate or deactivate the drive with these switch gear from ISR in Sweden. These smaller buttons down here operate the headlights and the horn. Like I said, ISR master cylinder. There's just one master cylinder because this bike doesn't have a clutch. ISR style, but actually custom lever. They didn't make one just quite the right length for my needs, so I built another one. Carrying on around the front, we mentioned the controls for the headlights. The headlights are these tiny little LED items from a Polish company called 4X LED, and they hide behind or hide underneath little painted aluminium winglets, which have translucent leading edges, and inside of these are strips of LEDs that work like indicators. So they're amber LEDs that scroll from the inside to the outside. Custom lower bracket that integrates with the streamlined or the aerodynamic fork covers. The fork covers themselves again have translucent trailing edges, which have running lights and indicators again. The front wheel has custom ABS machined wheel covers. The seat shell and this nose and the belly pan are all CNC'd machined from 6061 aluminium, so they're machined from billet, crazily enough. This mesh is an air intake that cools the components that hide under this battery box. So this is the battery box that's full of hundreds of lithium-ion pouches. It gives the bike a range of anywhere between 90 miles if you're really thrashing it, or 220 miles if you're around town. Inside the aluminium belly pan, there's the battery charger, which is a unit that's about this big, and a battery controller, which delivers the power to the motor in the center of the bike. So this ribbed item here is the battery pack, and then the cylindrical item there is the motor. It's a 14.4 kilowatt motor, produces 110 horsepower, 140 foot-pounds, 190 newton meters. The really interesting thing about electric is the horsepower figure is not a peak horsepower figure, it's a constant horsepower figure. So this bike has 110 horsepower from 0 RPM all the way through the rev range. Working further back, there's custom CNC'd foot peg carriers. The ergonomics are actually very similar to the original SRF, the donor bike, the Zero SRF donor bike. The seat height and the footrests, footrest distance is actually very consistent with the original bike. Has really nice ergonomics, so I didn't really muck around with that. The frame, you can see here, is based on the original SRF donor bike frame, although albeit detabbed, cleaned up. And then there's a subframe underneath this seat, which is completely custom as well. Single monoshock shower with hidden behind the number plate, there's a little piggyback unit. It's fully adjustable suspension. The swing arm is the stock swing arm from the SRF, although it's been very slightly modified. The really interesting thing about the SRF is it has the axle for the motor and the pivot for the swing arm are exactly the same. When we go around the other side, we can talk about the drive system, but there's no tension issues with the drive system. So behind this carrier here, there's a huge self-lubricating bushing that goes onto the very highly accurately machined surface that's part of the motor. So the swing arm actually pivots on part of the motor. We've got the rear wheel, again, CNC'd ABS covers, perspex, and little aluminium fins inside of it, just referencing sort of 1980s turbofan wheels from rally cars of that era. We're also running very thin and flexible Goodrich brake lines, so that the brake lines are actually able to run through the swing arm, so they enter here and they exit here. In the wheel covers, you can see on this rear one, but it's the same principle on the front. There's actually a removable door which allows the calipers to be removed, so you can remove the wheel. So there's one on each side on the front wheel as well. So the tail itself is a single machined piece of aluminium that goes from the rear all the way to the front of the battery box. It's got a custom sort of integrated, ultra suede covered seat. The seating angle's not as extreme as it might originally appear. There's actually two densities inside of this seat. So there's a rigid density that goes from this edge and is almost horizontal. And then there's a much softer density on top that deforms. So when you sit on it, you actually have a much more kind of horizontal seating kind of experience. So you're not actually canted as forward as you might think or feel. So on the end of the tail, there are perspex lenses. Again, these have LEDs behind them. So this red area is just the normal kind of running light tail light. So that's illuminated. And then when you apply the brakes, this center line illuminates red. When you put the indicators on, these outside lenses sweep an amber LED color. If you really brake hard, the center and the two outside lenses also light up. And if you do an emergency brake, then the center, the outsides, and then the trailing edges that are on these little heel guards also light up. So the bike kind of almost blooms. So if you're really braking really hard and you need like the car behind you who's probably texting to know that like something serious is happening, this whole bike, the whole back end of the bike essentially lights up. This bike has no clutch. It's a direct drive system, so the motor drives the rear sprocket directly through this carbon Kevlar belt. Like I said, the motor and the swing arm share the same center, so there's no variance in tension on this belt. So you have to service this belt maybe, I can't remember, every 10,000 miles or maybe 20,000 miles. One thing I really liked about the stock SRF, and a detail that I kept, is they had this floating rear sprocket that floats off the wheel. So the covers, the custom covers I designed kind of complement that, but leave this sort of hole running through the center. So they're not full covers. The front and the rear are not full covers. They're actually kind of partial covers. They wrap into the center of the tire or into the center of the wheel. Some other small details. The heel guard on this side of the bike also incorporates a belt guard. Both sides of the heels have, again, these translucent trailing edges. So these act as either brake lights or they act as indicators, turn signals. Even the swing arm has a little piece of aerodynamics on it. You may have noticed there's no clutch lever because the motorcycle has no clutch, it's direct drive. And there's a small 5-way thumb toggle that operates the main screen that's hidden behind this black Perspex detail. There were a couple of big ideas behind the build of this motorcycle. One, I really thought it was an opportunity to have a look at motorcycle design, especially electric motorcycle design, and see what we could do with it. It's not necessary for this bike to mimic a combustion engine bike with a traditional fuel tank. You know, it doesn't need an exhaust. It doesn't have inlet manifolds, outlet manifolds. The other thing I didn't want to do is I didn't necessarily want to build a motorcycle that was fully faired and sort of hid the technology. So I wanted to celebrate the electric technology. I wanted to have a kind of clean first principles look at what the design language of electric could be. If we didn't have to build a motorcycle that looked like a combustion engine motorcycle, or in fact, almost if you imagine designing a motorcycle as if petrol bikes had never existed, how would you go about it? So like I said earlier, like there are very minimal surfaces that you need to support the rider. You have the seat, you have the foot pegs, you have the handlebars, and then you have these pads that you need to squeeze with your knees. That really helps. So we had those human control surfaces, and then there was this idea of also having machine control surfaces. So that's some of the display here, these little kind of aerodynamic winglets, aerodynamic fork guards, heel protectors, etc. So we're left with this really kind of clean look, which is intended to really accentuate this kind of core of the motorcycle, this electrical core. So it's almost like these two elements sort of intersecting with each other. So that's the Untitled Motorcycles Zero XP. I hope you enjoyed learning about it. Please feel free to follow us on Instagram or visit our website, untitledmotorcycles.com. And thanks for watching. And don't forget to subscribe to Bike Shed's YouTube channel, where they review not just electric motorcycles, but petrol motorcycles and other weird and wonderful stuff.